many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
Welcome to Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.TV. Thank you for joining me this evening. Going to dive into this mass shooting that happened in San Bernardino in California. Top article on Drudge Report, Jihad comes to Cali. Says here, this was out of the Daily Mail out of the UK. Muslim couple who killed 14 had ties to international terror. Saeed Rizwan Farik, 28, and Tashfeen Malik, 27, were killed in a gun battle with police after a mass shooting. The family of the gunman have claimed that he had been teased by colleagues about his long Islamic beard hours after it emerged that he had also clashed with a Jewish co-worker over religion weeks before he and his wife killed 14 at a holiday party. Now, why is that right there, that little bit right there, important? Well, because if this is a radical Islamic thing, clashing with a Jew at work, and then said there they joked about his Islamic beard. And it was a Christmas party. They put in here, of course, holiday party. But it was basically a Christmas party. Now, I've been saying that something like this was going to happen. And I still believe that they allow things like this to happen. And they do it by not intentionally going, let's make sure this one person, they have done that before too. When you look at what policies they choose to go by and what ones they choose to work around for a agenda, and you see what's going on over in Europe, where they just allow basically herds of people from who knows where to push their way across the border. That's really what it is. It's not just, people wanting to come. It's they're forcing their way in. They're creating a situation where, you know, your money is being spent to either house them or, you know, feed them. It becomes a thing where you lose your rights, you lose your money, your wealth for a crisis that others created. And, if there's a proper vetting, the Blaze, or I think it was Glenn Beck, was working with a group or someone to properly vet people. That way, people that actually need help are getting it. Um, and it's not that we don't want people coming in the United States. It's we have a welfare program. And this welfare program is the major part of this. And without it, there wouldn't be so much hostility towards immigrants. But when we will close our borders at certain points, look at the northern border here in the United States. That's a little bit tougher of a border than the southern border. Why is that? Because it's a government controlled border. When they say open border policy that Obama has, he doesn't have a open border policy. He has a controlled border policy. He lets it happen when he can use it for his agenda. And they will use it to try to, get more Syrian immigrants in, and we won't know where these people are coming from. We already know that the people coming across the border are coming from a lot more places than was originally talked about. It's just some people from Mexico, maybe Guatemala. Now we already see that it's well beyond that. And when we see this happening and we see what happened in Europe, they don't go, well, maybe we should try to, do something that isn't a hindrance on the people that are already here. What I mean is where people aren't, your tax doesn't go up another 20% because you have to pay for all these people. Now, where there is room, where people are willing to vouch to basically take on a family, sponsor them basically, that's one thing. But when we literally use taxpayer money to buy out hotels, there's an issue when you have churches basically, well, we're going to help. And then the churches are overran, and basically the actual church owners and members and can't go there anymore. When you look at what's going on, it's not about immigration. It's about forced relocation through what we've done in the Middle East, what we continue to do, and then the open border policy where it only takes a few to figure it out and it opened the floodgates. And we want people to be able to move throughout the world a lot freer. But we have to do it in a way where it's people making for themselves that ability. And usually, when you look at a lot of the situations, it's either government or some other type of organization that claims authority over others. And a lot of times they're able to do this because the majority of people are not able to protect themselves. You know, you can even look at it as in areas where government was strong but not as strong, and then criminal elements take over. And they become the power structure, which you can claim all government is criminal, but they usually will take away guns for everybody but themselves, which allows them to become even more corrupt. But you also have to look at it is what helped that along. Usually, government making things illegal, just a simple you having it or you ingesting something raw milk. If you go buy raw milk from a farmer and you don't own a share in the herd, you're just wanting to buy some raw milk. Oh yeah, that's a crime. Can't put that in your body because we didn't regulate it that way. It's not pasteurized. But it's my body. I wanted raw milk. Nope, nope, nope. So you have to buy into a herd. So you own part of that herd. Therefore, you can benefit the fruits from that. And when we look at the gun issue, we see what happened over in France. When the Paris attacks happened, we seen everybody pray for Paris. Pray for Paris. Had a few talk about gun laws, why we should get rid of them. But when this happened, and look how quick they were to come out and go, yeah, this was a terrorist attack. And then this happens in California. Mind you, California being strict on guns. When this happens, and even people I completely disagree with, politically, philosophically, ideological ways, but you look at these people and they came out and we pray for the families and we pray for the families. What does the left do? This is why we need stricter gun laws. We've seen some of the left media come out and talk about pray for the victims' families. That's not going to do anything. Well, hold on. You some of these same people prayed for Paris, but then mock you for praying for the Cali victims and their families. Pray for Paris, but not these people. Mock it. And throw on your anti-gun rhetoric. Well, because you couldn't throw that anti-gun rhetoric around for what happened in Paris. But because this happened in the United States, even though it happened in California, it happened in the United States, and there's still a lot of states that allow guns, and a lot freer than California. We have to go directly after that and mock the people praying for the victims and their family in California. That's really sick. I'm not a super religious person. I'm a more I tend to be more spiritual rather than religious. I just try to be in tune with any higher power that may be there. I let people believe what they want. I grew up in a Methodist church. You know, I hold some of my beliefs. I don't, subscribe to any certain type of labeled religion. I don't believe in organized religion because of what it seems to stand for. And I think really does stand for. But that's kind of sick that you would mock people praying for the victims to push your anti-gun rhetoric. Didn't want to pray for the victims and their family right off the bat. You wanted to go after the guns and then mock the praying. And, the reaction that'll come out of this, you're going to hear BS solutions from both sides because we have progressive establishment authoritarians on both sides that are basically running the parties, and they are so corrupt that it seems anybody trying to work their way up the ladder to really make a actual change ends up becoming just as corrupt. And so a lot of what you're going to hear the talking heads talk about, not really going to be any type of solution. Why is that? Well, like in this Ron Paul Liberty report, he points out wrong diagnosis. So for you get for the wrong diagnosis, you will always get the wrong treatment. And for that reason, when you see the talking heads on any network, including Fox, you're going to see recent history prove these points wrong. And we'll get into a little bit of the economy later, which will bring that point back up. But let's go ahead and get to this Ron Paul Liberty report. California shooting reaction, wrong diagnosis, wrong treatment.
Turn out to be more disgruntled employee than terrorism, but police say it was definitely a planned attack and by two people who were dressed and armed like soldiers. It was just before 11 this morning here at the Inland Regional Center in San Bernardino, a county office which helps the developmentally disabled. A gathering for the public health.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, and Daniel, it's good to see you today.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Good. I'd like to talk about the big issue of the day. It's been around for a while, and it's grossly distorted all the time. That's all about guns and gun violence and what we ought to do about it. And it seems like every time we have an episode, there's a few people out front, including our president, without even knowing the answers or what's going on. Well, we have to take away the rights of the people to own guns, and that's going to solve all the problems. And that looks like what's going on. They want to pass laws and take away these rights. But, sometimes I think they get misled. They also yesterday talked a bit about motives. They do that all the time in domestic violent murder cases. And why did he do it? Why did he do it? And yesterday, the whole thing, was why did he do it? If these guys did it, why did they do it? But their main goal is to try to connect it to Islam and terrorism so that the reaction might even involve foreign policy like the killings were in Paris. So they want to do this, but they don't really want to know what the motive is. In this instance, we may find out what the motive is. Maybe it was something to do with workplace violence or something. I mean, and the killings, go on all the time, and they look for it. But they never want to find out the motive might be related to stupid policies of our government that precipitates violence. Not that I'm suggesting that yesterday's violence was related, but who knows if even if it is related to our foreign policies, it's never implicates us having some responsibility. It's always going to be that there's a bunch of people out there that don't like us because we're great. We're exceptional people, and they want to get rid of it. So I'm sure you must have had an immediate reaction yesterday, and you sat and watched TV all day long watching these programs, or were you unable to sustain that?
No, I looked at alternative means. Twitter is a great way of scanning things. But, it's interesting. The first few hours after something like this happens, it's, I think, the most fascinating time because you hear the most outrageous things being reported by the news. And they go down the memory hole because they're completely outrageous. But like you said, it's interesting that special interests, interests seem to glom onto something like this to push their agendas. You point out the gun control people, the anti-Muslim people, and when something happens, they jump in and they draw to their conclusions, and they build hysteria among the people.
The one thing I don't think they have a high concern about is just the numbers of people or people being killed. Yeah, it's significant. What was it, 14 yesterday, and 130 in Paris, and all this, and that's serious. But there's a lot of people dying in this country from violence. There's estimate that there's 45 people have died since this thing broke yesterday. 45 people a day get killed with inner city violence, and nobody's asking, well, who's responsible for this? And it's. But if there's something that they can tie international and something where they can attack us and enhance big government, that's different. But take the incident where that atrocious episode occurred where the policeman went nuts. He shot 16 times to a guy that was unarmed and down and shot him in the back. Well, it sounds to me like government control of guns is what we have to address. I mean, what are these guys doing? But no, are they going to take the guns from the policemen or curtail police violence? No, they're going to curtail the rights of the people to defend themselves, the right of ownership of self-defense, and that's what they're going to deal with. So when you think of how many people are dying in the inner city, think of how many people die in the drug war. Did they ever say, well, yeah, I guess the real reason is the stupid laws that we have? They don't do that. And same way with highway deaths. There's 35,000 deaths a year and on government highways. But where's the real concern about it? And I think you've already mentioned this, but when they can politicize it, 2 deaths or 10 deaths or 14 deaths become very valuable property. So the number of lives aren't too important. And if they can some way or another tie this into terrorism, boy, they feel like they have a gold mine.
And it really was a bit chilling yesterday, the mob mentality. And we even saw today in a magazine that is otherwise, I think, generally in agreement with a lot of what you have to say. The American Conservative ran an article by Philip Jenkins, who's a professor at Baylor, who said, I hate to say it, but now I agree with Trump. We've got to start watching these mosques. He said, it is shocking that anyone is shocked by Trump wanting the surveillance of mosques.
Yeah. See, they want to work it into this clash between Islam and the West and the clash of civilizations. But I think there is a clash, but I don't think it's this so-called civilization thing. I think it has to do with those of us who believe in liberty and limited local government versus those who like big government and are authoritarians. And of course, the people who are using these incidents are the authoritarians. They want big government, and they want UN banning of guns and all these things. So, but they never really talk about the deaths caused by government guns. And I'm not talking about when you have a declared war where you truly are defending your country, which is a legitimate function. But I'm talking about, the last 14 years of our wars in the Middle East, killing, and as a consequence, millions have died. And but nobody seems to ask about that, and nobody says, take away the guns of these people. Why should a single guy in a so-called free society have the authority to assassinate Americans and drone people and kill innocent people? It's collateral damage. In comparison, I see that as so much a greater threat. Our real threat is what's happening with our government's abuse of our liberties than, the problems that we face when somebody does a violent act like this. Because I think violence and killing is going to be with us for a long time to come. But I'm also convinced that it can be curtailed better with local, controls and proper gun laws where people are allowed to defend themselves. But it just seems like, once again, I've mentioned it before, that the propaganda machine seems that's where we come up short, even though I believe we're on the side of logic and we're on the side, I think, of a lot of people.
I think you made a good point just before we started. Every time one of these things happens, we're actually the victims. The law-abiding people, the 99.99% that don't break the law, are the ones they tell us we have to lose some of our freedoms. Here's an interesting quote from the article, and I think it is really quite chilling. He said, if you do not maintain radical mosques under surveillance, you may as well abandon any and all pretense of trying to limit or suppress terrorism on U.S. soil.
It's back to the clash of civilization type thing.
Our friend Phil Giraldi, who's been on the show a couple of times, he had a good comment in the comments section. He said, this opens the door for all of us to be surveilled at the whim of some bureaucrat.
And unfortunately, that's what's going on. When you think about going through the TST lines at the airports, we are so abused there, and our rights are abused. But how did that happen? Those changes came under this pretense that the world was coming to an end. They misjudged what 9/11 was all about, and the Patriot Act gets passed, and all these things, and so it's we that did that. And I remember arguing and debating it with other members, and they said, yeah, but they agreed with my theoretical argument for liberty. They said, yeah, but the American people are scared, and I have to vote for this. And that is really where the real problem is when you have a crisis, there's always somebody going to be bouncing forward, and the more the louder he can be, or an individual can be, the more likely he'll be attracted to people who have been frightened. We've conditioned our people to be frightened and dependent. If they're frightened about where they're going to get fed, they don't have to work harder. The government will take care of them forever until the government goes broke and the people go broke. So under these conditions, whether they're physically threatened or economically threatened, they always go and say, let government take care of us.
You make a good point about the TSA, because it would be absolutely objectionable, all of these curtailments of our liberties, even if they did work and prevented this. But we see that the TSA, 96% of the time, fails to discover bombs, guns, all sorts of contraband. This was a recent test. So it doesn't even work. It makes insult to injury.
Well, and I think that's obviously true about the gun issue too. You could take all those guns away from people, more registration, and they'll still get guns. I think a pretty good example of this is take Paris. I understand their laws are very, very strict against gun. There's no guns in that city. yet it didn't prevent that from happening. So they get a twofer again. They get, well, guns are bad, and we have to have even more laws, and it's part of this this clash of civilization that we've probably initiated, or at least a large participant in, because we've gone a long way from home to get people upset with us. But I'd like to, make the point that we should be more accurate in diagnosing it, get the motive, and then the treatment might be a little bit different rather than jumping the gun and satisfying their instincts and their desires to build even bigger government, more authoritarians that will take over.
Yeah, and the media has a responsibility that they don't live up to because they're rushing for headlines and to beat the other guys out, to not hype these things up and use information they have not checked.
And of course, that's why we exist, because I think everybody knows that comes to this program, realize that they're not getting the full scoop from the media, and that we make a sincere effort to offer an alternative explanation. But it is not a complex explanation. It's based on personal liberty and local government and minimal government. It's not based on hypothetical things about clashes of internationalism that requires even more government and more government bombs and more government guns, and protect the government and their guns. The left ought to be held responsible for a lot of this problem in that, especially internationally. They say take away the guns, but they never want to take away the guns of the government. And it's government's guns, whether it's in the military or the government guns in the police force, it causes so much trouble that we need to make the right diagnosis. No, in a free and a perfect, it can't be a perfect society. But the striving for has to be for liberty, not for authoritarian government, and not for dependency on government, and that we have a better understanding that the purpose of government is to protect liberty. It's not to take care of us from cradle to grave. It's not to take care of us on all our moral behavior, nonviolent, of course. It's not for the government there to run and regulate the economy and have a Federal Reserve System that thinks they know how to fix interest rates and know which people ought to be bailed out. And it's not a world where we can go around the world and go thousands of miles away from our home and pretending that we are so wise that we can police the world. Those ideas has to change. You know what is amazing is that is more or less what George W. Bush ran on in 2000. He didn't like to. He claimed he wasn't for policing the world, and we shouldn't interfere in the affairs of other nations. And look at what happened. And that goes back. Can we trust our politicians? Not easily, but we certainly ought to work in the direction of putting the pressure on the politicians to live up to the ideals of what a free society is all about. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report, and please come back soon.
Ron Paul Liberty Report, RonPaulLibertyReport.com, and Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube. Subscribe and check them out. Great updates. Now, when we look at this issue, we have government destabilizing a region, which is causing people to flee. They flee to the Western countries that instead of, a proper, check, and well, if we can't verify you are who you are, we can't exactly just let you across the border. We at least need to know that you're not, maybe a spy or something that's someone here to destabilize the nation. But really, even when they try to do that, it doesn't come out effective. Government's just not going to be good at that. Like they were talking about with TSA. So we see that fails. Well, what are the things that really irk people? you give criminal organizations and people that do some pretty bad things guns. You tell us that we shouldn't have any. People linked to those groups, in turn, use them against us. With no true peace in the areas that we haven't really won any war. ISIS grows, and then they infiltrate the fleeing, basically refugees from these regions. And now we have to worry about it. It looks like government creates a problem and it gets in the way of you being able to protect yourself from that problem. And I'm not saying that we should not allow people in. I'm saying that we need to stop the welfare, for one. We need to get rid of gun regulations. And then we need to enforce actual rights. You know, if they want to come to this country, they can, but they're going to have to stay somewhere, and you can't just take someone's property. You can't just force your way. Can't go, well, I'm going to camp out on your front lawn. Well, no, I'd rather not have a big bald spot that I've worked hard to not have. Believe me, there's plenty of good people that will help families out if they need help. There will be sponsors, but we can't just take everybody. Between, European countries and the U.S., we cannot take. We don't have any infrastructure in place to just take all these people at once. What you end up doing a lot of times is you end up creating these ghettos for the immigrants, and then you create animosity for giving them the crap that's the way they're going to look at it. You give them the rundown building to live in, they're going, really? Is this any better than where I was, other than instead of having a little bit of nature around, I'm in a concrete jungle? We need it to be beneficial for them, which means you can't give them free stuff. They're not going to all just come flying in when they know that, well, there's not really any jobs there. If you do have any money, how long is that going to last you? And there's not going to be assistance for you to, prosper in a place where those people in that area. Look at how many people are working part-time jobs that want a full-time job. working multiple part-time jobs because they can't find a full-time job. Therefore, they're working a lot of hours, but they don't get any overtime because it's multiple jobs that they have to work. Work 2-3 different jobs, work 60 hours a week, and you're getting paid straight pay 60 hours. There's no overtime in that. You can't take a place that is down on its luck and really not being able to recover and go, here, let's put some more pressure on that. And I do want to get into the economy here in a little bit. I'm kind of scooting through this first hour a little quicker than I expected, actually. Give me a second here. I was trying to get this article. There we go. This one was out of Reason.com. How background checks and an assault weapon ban failed in San Bernardino. The Washington Post reports that the 4 guns used in the San Bernardino massacre were all purchased legally from federally licensed firearm dealers, which means the buyers passed background checks. As usual, in other words, President Obama's knee-jerk response to mass shootings, universal background checks, makes no sense. Federal officials say Saeed Rizwan Farouk, one of the massacre's perpetrators, bought the 2 9mm pistols used in the attack. A Springfield and a Llama, the gun shops in San Diego and Corona. That means he passed background checks, which indicates he did not have a disqualifying criminal or psychiatric record. An acquaintance of Farouk's bought the 2 AR-15 style rifles used in the attack, a DPMS A-15 and a Smith & Wesson M&P 15, also at gun shops in San Diego and Corona. The fact that the rifles were legally purchased in California exposes the fetchiness of another gun policy that Obama favors. A federal ban on so-called assault weapons. California has one of the country's strictest assault weapon bans, but somehow it did not forbid the sale of rifles that have been widely described in the press as assault weapons, or even assault rifles, which falsely suggests that they were capable of automatic fire. How is that possible? The DPMS 15 and the Smith & Wesson M&P both come in California legal versions, which means they have bullet buttons that require the insertion of a loose round or other tool to detach the magazine. With that feature, the magazine is not considered detachable, which is part of the state's assault weapon definition. Gun controllers tend to view bullet buttons as a sneaky end run around California's assault weapon ban. Huffington Post reporter Daniel Morans calls the bullet button option a technical loophole. Josh Sugarman, executive director of the Violence Policy Center, complains that gun manufacturers are cynically exploiting an inadvertent limitation of the law. But bullet buttons are explicitly allowed by California Department of Justice regulations, which say detachable magazines means an ammunition feeding device that can be removed readily from the firearm with neither disassembly of the firearm action nor use of a tool being required. The DOJ adds that the bullet ammunition cartridge is considered a tool. Since rifles with bullet buttons did not have what California considers detachable magazines, they can include military style features that would otherwise be forbidden, such as folding stocks, pistol grips, or flash suppressors. Assault weapon is a arbitrary, legally defined category, so the fact that California does not consider these rifles to be assault weapons means they aren't assault weapons. It makes no sense to complain that California's assault weapon ban misses some assault weapons, which are whatever legislators say they are, nor does it make sense to complain about design changes such as the bullet buttons aimed at complying with the law. Gun manufacturers that produce California legal guns are doing precisely what the state has told them to do. Sugarman tells the Post the gun industry is expert at marketing military bred weapons with a wink and a nod, and they are constantly working to skirt the law. As we've seen in California, that complaint is pretty rich, coming from Sugarman, who in 1988 BPC report Assault Weapons and Accessories in America argued that the weapon's menacing looks, coupled with the public's confusion over fully automatic machine guns versus semi-automatic assault weapons, anything that looks like a machine gun is assumed to be a machine gun, can only increase the chances of public support for restrictions on these weapons. Targeting so-called assault weapons was always about emphasizing menacing looks in the hope of confusing the public, and to this day, leading supporters of the laws like California's misrepresent the firearms they want to ban. That includes Obama, who describes these semi-automatic rifles as fully automatic weapons of war, and Hillary Clinton, who conflates them with machine guns. And that out of Reason.com. Okay. Give me a second here. We're going to go ahead and move on. And I think I'm going to save a couple of these economic things for the end of the broadcast. We'll cover a few other things first. Try to get this browser restarted here because it just doesn't play right. I think I have it up here. Okay. Now, when we start talking about libertarian ideas, one of the most common things that I get is, what, how you think you're going to get that? How you that's so far away. Why even try? And we are at a critical point, definitely right now, and we've been on this path for a while. But I really believe we're at a critical point that we need to make a change this election. But we also have to continue to make people question, this brainwashing that has been put out for the majority of people that, believe everything that news tells them and doesn't critically think anything. Jeff Dice talked at Mises Circle event in Phoenix, Arizona, and he went over things like political options, strategic options, withdrawal option, and really how to get to the hearts and minds of people to really get the message spread. And again, you hear it from me, and I originally was that constitutionalist, but I truly am a pretty hardcore libertarian when I get down to my philosophy. But we do live in the world we are in today, and we have to, in the most peaceful manner possible, start reversing the course that we're on now, because it leads to nothing more than authoritarian rule and turning the public into a obstacle for these people that you become dispensable. And we don't want to live in that society. And when it gets to a certain point, they just let us eat each other alive, because that's basically what happens in a collapsing society. So we need to look at ways to move forward. I'm going to play this. It's not super long or nothing. But this is Jeff Dice, What Must Be Done.
Welcome to Mises Weekends. I'm your host, Jeff Dice, and we hope you are enjoying a very happy Thanksgiving weekend with your friends and family. This weekend, we feature a video clip from a talk I gave at a recent Mises Institute event in Phoenix entitled What Must Be Done. And in the talk, I lay out 4 possible strategic options for libertarians, including the political option, the strategic withdrawal option, winning hearts and minds, and actual resistance or civil disobedience. So I hope you enjoy the talk, and I hope you have a great weekend. From my perspective, when we talk about what must be done, when libertarians especially talk about what must be done, the discussion tends to revolve around 4 common strategy options. And none of these are mutually exclusive. There's a lot of overlap between them. And of course, we all, I think, favor a multi-pronged approach. But I think we can categorize most approaches loosely into one of these 4 categories. So the first option we'll call the political option, right? Or to borrow a tired phrase, working within the system. So this argument, I think the hippies tried that one. But the argument is understandable. It goes something like this. Look, government and the political process that surrounds it, these things are inevitable in the real world. And therefore, libertarians can't stand idly by on the sidelines while the politicians inexorably do what they do, steal our freedoms. But instead, we have to organize and become active politically, maybe under the banner of a third-party vehicle like the Libertarian Party, or by working within the Republican Party. Because whether we want to accept it or not, politics involves itself with us. So from this perspective, political action can be viewed as a sort of self-defense, something that we're forced into. Now, I've noticed that amongst libertarians, this approach usually has a national focus, right? That we need some sort of national presidential candidate to carry the banner. But it contemplates political action at the state and local level as well. And it has appeal, I admit to it, especially for libertarians in a hurry. You know, there's a vote, there's something tangible. And ultimately, at least in theory, the political approach attempts to mimic and reverse the incrementalism that has been so successful for the political left, the progressive left, over the past century. Now, speaking for myself, let me just say that the political option, at least in terms of national politics, and we'll get to that later, strikes me as the least attractive alternative among those available to us today. I mean, when we think about the amount of time and energy and money and human capital that have been invested trying to win the political and legislative battles, it's staggering. But what do we have to show for it? You know, the 20th century represents the total triumph of left progressivism in the political sphere. Everything we think of, central banking, income taxes, the New Deal programs, the Great Society programs, these are all enormous political victories that changed the landscape forever. Okay, everything today, after following the progressive century, has become politicized. Everything from whether it's okay to engage in fantasy football betting online to what bathrooms a transgender person should use. Everything has become a political question. So today, everything about human activity is framed with the question, what should government do? What should government do about this? It's never whether government should do anything at all. And I think we need to accept that. I think we need to understand the political option, the political strategy within this context of the progressive triumph. So a second option that libertarians often consider might be termed loosely strategic withdrawal. And you might have heard of the idea of the Benedict option. This is something that's going around today in Catholic circles, amongst Catholics who are unhappy with the new Pope or unhappy with the direction of the Church and where it sits in the broader culture. So Catholics have been talking about this Benedict option. And of course, in Atlas Shrugged, we had Ayn Rand talking about going Galt, right? Galt's Gulch, which was in reference to sort of a strike by the productive class that takes place in that novel. So this approach involves separating, withdrawing, or segregating ourselves in some way from the larger society and from the political landscape. So it asserts, with some justification, I think, that the current environment is largely hopeless for libertarians politically and culturally, and therefore attempting to play a game where the deck is stacked so heavily against us and the rules are skewed against us that this is foolish. So it's better to retreat, at least for now, and build a life outside the state's parameters to the extent possible. And in this sense, the withdrawal option has a certain tactical appeal. It's almost like the concept in martial arts where instead of taking a force head on, you sort of move to the side and attempt to deflect it. And a strategic withdrawal can take many forms. There's a range of alternatives, right? It can be some sort of absolute separation all the way down to some subtle lifestyle changes. In some cases, this strategy can mean actually physically uprooting where you live and where you work. We have examples of this. People have tried things like the Free State Project in New Hampshire. There's a new project called Liberland in Europe along the same lines. There's been some seasteading proposals over the years and some attempts to create libertarian homesteads in South America. But I asked David Gordon to find, there was a great interview with Murray Rothbard where they were talking about seasteading. And I will say that Murray kind of joked, I don't want to go live on some blank island. So he wasn't necessarily a fan, but we don't have to move to an island per se. I mean, withdrawal can take other forms. Some libertarians just choose to live off the grid, either literally or metaphorically, right? I think the prepper movement represents a form of strategic self-sufficiency, and simply choosing to move to a remote area, a rural countryside area, I think is part of this option. And of course, just withdrawing from the American way of endless consumption and debt, you might call it living small, is another form of strategic retreat in itself. And it often allows libertarians to live happier lives and also to minimize one's cooperation with the state's regulatory and tax clutches. And of course, homeschooling probably represents the greatest example of libertarian strategic withdrawal. In the modern age, it's enabled millions of kids and parents to escape the state education complex. And I think withdrawal can be as simple as just abandoning state media or unplugging yourself from the digital white noise that surrounds us. And of course, finally, expatriation, voting with one's feet, is a time-honored historical strategy for removing oneself from a tyrannical state. And this happens domestically, with people moving from a higher tax state to a lower tax state, but also internationally. And we have many tens of thousands of people not only leaving the country now, but also renouncing their citizenship. And I'm sure that there are people in this room who have at least considered this option for themselves. And who could blame a young person today looking at the landscape for thinking that maybe I'm going to leave the U.S.? Now, a third tactic that we often advocate might be called the hearts and minds strategy, right? This is education, winning hearts and minds. So this approach is multi-pronged. It involves education, academia, traditional media, social media, religion, books and articles and speeches and literature, and even pop culture. Hearts and minds is really the strategy behind why we hold conferences like we're holding today. And the hearts and minds strategy is really all about education, persuasion, and marketing at every level. And I think this is the approach where the Mises Institute, anyway, has made the most headway. A hearts and minds strategy argues that we can't really make any significant headway or any real changes in the world unless and until a significant portion of the population shrugs off its bad ideas and begins to embrace what we would say are more sensible ideas, particularly in the area of politics and economics and social theory. In other words, politics is a lagging indicator. It follows downstream from culture. So we should focus more on the underlying disease, not the symptoms. So just as left progressives captured institutions of the West, they captured academia, news media, and government, and churches, and Hollywood, and publishing. Libertarians ought to focus our efforts on reclaiming those institutions for ourselves and for liberty. So it makes sense from the hearts and minds strategy to try to launch liberty-minded people into these streams of academia or business or media or religion. And this way we can begin to strike the root, or at least chip away at the root, the mindset that supports the state. Now clearly this is a daunting task. A wholesale attack on the institutions of our country. It's a long game. But the argument goes that something like this: unless and until we win hearts and minds, it scarcely matters whom we elect or what bill gets passed or how we arrange our personal and professional lives, the same statist mentality will continue to resurface time and time again to work against us. And I think the state's education racket maybe offers the ripest target for us in terms of winning hearts and minds. So we really have this opportunity now in the digital age to appeal directly to the intelligent layperson, to bring Austrian economics and libertarian theory to them in ways that we never could before, and really bypassing the traditional channels. So I think the hearts and minds strategy has a lot of appeal, but it's a long game. It's not a quick fix. It's a strategy for sober people with long time horizons. Sober in the broader sense. And so the fourth option that often is discussed in libertarian circles, I'll just term resistance. Right here we're talking about actual civil disobedience or agorism. This tactic contemplates tax protests, evading or ignoring regulations, engaging in black market activity and the like. And it also contemplates the use of technological advances. There's a lot of third way technological libertarians now who promote things like encryption and cyber currencies and platforms like Uber, all of which are areas when they were first developed, they sort of existed in a gray area as regards their legality. Now, agorism was the preferred approach of the late libertarian theorist Sam Konkin, who encouraged people to bypass the state and devote their lives to black market or gray market activities and avoid taxation and regulation as a result. He called this counter-economics. And agorism had some critiques. Among those was Murray Rothbard, who found Kongin's antipathy to being engaged in wage labor and white markets, legitimate markets so-called, as anti-market itself. I mean, after all, what does agorism offer the vast majority of workers, or how will goods and services like automobiles and steel be produced in an agorist society? And Rothbard saw agorists as sort of neglecting, he says, quote unquote, neglecting the overwhelming bulk of economic life to concentrate on marginalia. And I think, let's be frank, the appeal of living the agorist lifestyle, living without a driver's license maybe, or not being able to own any real estate, that sort of thing, might not be wildly popular. Now, as for applying new technology to bypass the state, cyber currencies, I'm all for it. Any innovation that makes it harder for the state to govern us as a practical matter is something that we should celebrate, clearly. But we should also guard against the false hope of technology. The same technology which might serve to facilitate privacy or title transfers or stealth movement of money and people can also be exploited. It can be used by the state or be subject to its spying apparatus. And no innovation, no technology can change the fundamental questions of whether and how human affairs ought to be organized by the state. So these four basic approaches, we have politics, withdrawal, hearts and minds, and resistance. These give us a framework to consider some of our tactical approaches in an unfree world when we ask ourselves the question, what must be done? So it brings us back to the aforementioned Professor Hans Hermann Hoppe and his speech. I encourage you to read it. I think we have photocopies of it outside. It's really a fascinating topic, and Hans's treatment of it is razor sharp. Now keep in mind, he delivered this in 1997. So the digital revolution was still in its infancy. Social media, mobile devices didn't exist, and several precipitating centralizing events. The introduction of the euro, the September 11th attacks, the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, the crash of 2008, Greenspan and Bernanke's monetary hyperdrive, the rise of Obama, the full rise and contagion of PC in the West. None of these had yet occurred in 1997, and each of these events intensified the growth and the scale of centralized government power. But even looking back on what now seems like a relatively carefree time of 1997, Hoppe's explicit focus was this fundamental fight against the centralization of political power in whatever form it might take. So in fact, I think decentralization is a linchpin that connects each of the four tactical approaches that we've outlined earlier. If there's one principle and only one principle that libertarians ought to apply when considering strategy, it's this. that radical decentralization of state power must be our relentless goal. You know, the 20th century, the progressive century, witnessed the unprecedented centralization of power. We see this in Washington, D.C., in Brussels, at the UN, at the Fed, at the ECB. So our overriding goal has to be the reversal of this terrible trend and the creation of what Hoppe calls implicitly seceded territories. Now, he describes, very much a bottom-up strategy that found, really forwarded by what he calls natural elites. And we think of elites as the political class, or we think of these connected people, billionaires like Facebook, Zuckerberg, someone like that. But Hoppe sees a natural elite very differently. It's not made up of the political class or its court intellectuals, but instead it's made up of just accomplished, upstanding local citizens. And these natural elites, in Hoppe's view, form the counterbalance to the centralizers. And they serve as the vanguard of the bottom-up revolution. So Hoppe has three keys to this revolution in his section on strategy. Number one is that protection, defense, and justice have to be demonopolized. And this is one of the toughest areas for libertarians, right? To argue that police and courts and armies shouldn't be run by the state. But here Hoppe says we have to be steadfast in our advocacy of a truly free society, because if these functions remain under the sole power of a central state monopoly, then no progress towards liberty is possible, because we just can't trust the state to have guns and lawyers in jails. Second, Hoppe says that political decentralization has to be ruthlessly pursued. And here he actually makes an exception and says that voting, especially on local matters, can actually be morally justified on the grounds of self-defense, which is an interesting perspective coming from an anti-democrat like Hans Hoppe. And third, Hoppe argues democracy as a concept has to be attacked and ridiculed whenever and wherever possible. Private property forms the basis for a free society, while majority rule, including voting, the system that permits the theft of private property, forms the antithesis of Hoppe's free society. So as you think about things today, or as you leave today, I really encourage you to read Dr. Hoppe's article. I think it may just change the way you view this task that's before us. So in conclusion, let me give you a quote from Rod Dreher, writing in the American Conservative about this Benedict option that I mentioned earlier that some Catholics have been contemplating. It's from his article talking about the fall of Rome. And he says, Rome's collapse meant staggering loss. People forgot how to read, how to farm, how to govern themselves, how to build houses, how to trade, and even what it had once meant to be human. So has the world today fallen so far into reflexive statism that we've forgotten how to be free? Are we living like Benedict on the edge of a new dark age? Or is a revolution, a radically decentralized Hoppian bottom-up revolution brewing? Is the pushback we see all around the world against central states and their cobbled together ahistorical borders, against political elites, against bankers, against the UN and the IMF, against the euro, against taxpayer bailouts and cronyism, against PC, against this manufactured migration that's going on, and against drug laws? Is all this a last gasp, or is it a sign of a worldwide movement towards political decentralization? Well, the future's unwritten, we don't know. But we can play a role in this. And let us remember that every society worth having, every advanced liberal society, was built by people with long time horizons, horizons beyond their own lives. And generally, those societies were built under very difficult circumstances of material hardship beyond what we are likely to face in our lifetime. So let's appeal to our better natures and turn what must be done from a question into a declaration. Thank you very much.
Mises.org, or Mises, however you pronounce it, MISES.org, and Mises Media on YouTube. Subscribe, keep up to date. They put out quite a bit. A lot of great speakers. Tom Woods, Ron Paul, Lou Rockwell, So definitely subscribe. And, you know, this is one thing that really irks me. And, it happens in every group out there. But it's the infighting. And being libertarians, it really even irks me more because we know, or we should know by now, what the establishment does. They want people to just go, no immigration, put up a fence, and uh, we need to grab our guns and go to the border, and we don't need no people from outside this country to come in this country. We have all these types of people, and in the libertarian movement, we have a lot of libertarians that go, you shouldn't even vote. If you're voting, you're just continuing the system. And it's, no, I'm not. The system will continue if no one voted because no one's standing against it. Um, if you think there's someone out there that's truly going to stand against it and understands liberty and freedom, um, you probably should vote, but you don't have to. And libertarians should understand that. And we have people that go, oh, you have to go completely off the grid and move out in the woods if you want to be libertarian. No. Some people are like, you have to go out and do civil disobedience and cause a ruckus. No, you don't have to. Or you have to start you a podcast. No, you don't have to. But you need to do something. And everybody has their own path. As long as we're going for the same end goal, we might not get there as fast as we want. We might get there faster than we think. But that's only if we cooperate with each other. And the establishment knows this, and that's why divide and conquer is one of their biggest tactics, and using fear and playing off of people's emotions. Now, I do want to get into some of the economy. I said I would. November jobs. And you can find this one on Drudge Report. No, it's probably not going to want to come up for me. There it goes. Finance.yahoo.com, U.S. Employment Report, a green light for Fed interest rate rise. Oh, yeah. Reuters, U.S. employment increased at a healthy pace in November, in another sign of the economy's resilience, and will most likely be followed by the first Federal Reserve interest rate rise in a decade later this month. Non-farm payrolls rose 211,000 last month, the U.S. Labor Department said on Friday. September and October data was revised to show 35,000 more jobs than previously reported. The unemployment rate held at a 7.5-year low for 5%. Well, that's because we're not shedding jobs. That has nothing to do with our people looking for jobs. And we've went over that plenty of times. says here, as people return to the labor force in sign of confidence in the jobs market, the jobless rate is in a range many Fed officials see as consistent with full employment and has dropped 7/10 of a percentage point this year. And we've seen other reports come out that point to that not being true. But we have to ignore those ones because they didn't say what they wanted them to say. Therefore, we're just going to go with this one report right here. The employment report should remove the final doubts about a rate hike at the December meeting. The clear message from the labor market to the Fed is just do it, said Harm Banholz, chief U.S. economist at Union Credit Research in New York. Now, this is something I've been warning about. And I've been telling people, man, keep an eye on this. What's happened every time they've even considered raising the interest rate? The market freaks the hell out. Since the last time they did that and the market freaked out, Janet Yellen has been going around on this campaign talking about how, yeah, even if we did raise the interest rate, it's going to be so little. This isn't going to affect the market. What are you talking about? An interest rate? The fear of an interest rate hike freaks the market out. What are you talking about? Janet Yellen's, of course, using propaganda to manipulate to allow them to raise interest rate hikes because they've artificially kept them low for way too long. They know they have. They've created a bubble, and I've talked about the longer this would go on, the bigger the bubble would get. Well, the bubble has gotten bigger because even though we have this one report out, we've seen the other reports, multiple reports, that show even though unemployment's down, the people in the labor force, it's the labor force you want to look at. The labor force shows a lot of people not in it. What it also was showing was that there is a large amount of women no longer in the labor force, which is reaching highs that have not been seen for a long time. Of course, that was out of Yahoo and Reuters. We have one here out of cnsnews.com. Labor force participation improves slightly. 94,446,000 Americans not in labor force. The Bureau of Labor Statistics says economy added 211,000 jobs in November, and the unemployment rate was unchanged at 5%. The numbers of Americans not in the labor force last month totaled 94,446,000, a slight improvement from the 94,513,000 not in the labor force in October. And again, these can be previously full-time people that are now part-time. That doesn't say that the economy's gotten better because they were able to get a job at a McDonald's. or a Walmart, or both, or they're doing a paper route, something their kids should be doing. It said, and the labor force participation rate increased a tenth of a point, with 62.5% of the civilian non-institutional population either holding a job or actively seeking one. The Bureau of Labor Statistics says economy added 211,000 jobs in November, and the unemployment rate was unchanged at 5% in November, according to Labor Department. Sorry. Labor Department's Bureau of Labor Statistics, the nation's civilian non-institutional population consisting of all people 16 or older who were not in the military or an institution reached 251,747,000. Of those, 157,301,000 participated in the labor force by either holding a job or actively seeking one. The 157,301,000 who participated in the labor force equaled only 62.5% of the 251,747,000 civilian non-institutional population. The last time the labor force participation was as low as 62.5% was in October of 1977. As Federal Reserve Chair Janet Yellen has explained, the drop in the labor force participation rate since 2008 can be attributed to four factors: a greater number of retiring baby boomers, as well as an increase in the disability rolls. Hold on, I've seen more baby boomers working a lot longer. I see older people. I see people, a lot of people that are, we'll just say for the sake of it, retirement age and higher, that are working way past when they really should. I see older people going back to make up money. So I don't know if the baby boomers retiring's just not happening in my region or what. But I've heard other people talk about it. So increase in disability rolls, an increase in school enrollments, and general worker discouragement. Disability applications and educational enrollments typically are affected by clinical factors, and existing evidence suggests that the elevated levels of both many partly reflect perceptions of poor job prospects. Yellen said in a speech last year, moreover, the rapid pace of retirements over the past few years might reflect some degree of pull forward of future retirements in the face of a weak labor market. And that was out of cnsnews.com. I had an article from economiccollapseblog.com. Let me see if this clip I had is not too hard to get to here. I had it up. Don't know why I closed it. Okay. Darn it. Okay, I'll get into this article here. Get to it. Quick. Okay. And again, this was from the economiccollapseblog.com, the economic collapse. 27 major global stocks markets that have already crashed by double-digit percentages in 2015. Anyone that tries to tell you that a global financial crisis is not happening is not being honest with you. Right now, there are 27 major global stock markets that have declined by double-digit percentages from their peaks earlier this year, and this is truly a global phenomenon. I can't even speak right now. We have seen stock market crashes in Asia, Europe, South America, Africa, and the Middle East, but because U.S. stocks are only down less than 1,000 points from the peak earlier this year, most Americans seem to think that everything is just fine. The truth, of course, is that everything is not fine. We are witnessing a pattern similar to what we saw back in 2008. Back then, Chinese stocks and other major stock markets started crashing first, and then U.S. stocks followed later. And it appears that we may have entered the next leg down for markets in the Western world. This week, the Dow was down another 252 points on Thursday, and all the major stock indexes in the U.S. are now negative for the year, except for the NASDAQ. Unless there is major turnaround in the coming weeks, the 6-year winning streak for the U.S. stocks is likely over. But when you step back and look at what has been happening globally, a much more ominous picture emerges. I spent much of the afternoon looking at stock market charts for the largest economies all over the globe. What I discovered was financial carnage. That was much worse than I anticipated. It turns out there are 27 major global stock markets that have fallen by more than 10% from peaks that were set earlier this year. If you want to verify this information for yourself, just go to Trading Economics. As you can see, many of these stock market declines have been quite impressive. Number one, China down more than 30%. Saudi Arabia down more than 26%. Germany down more than 13, or around 13. United Kingdom down close to 12. Spain down 15. Brazil down more than 22. Malaysia down 17, Turkey down 16, India down close to 12, Chile down 11, Colombia down 30, Peru down 40, Bulgaria down 20, more than 20, Greece down more than 30, Poland down 19, here's Malaysia again here, which I think this is a different market in Malaysia, down 10%, Egypt down 32%, Indonesia down 18, Canada down 12, Ukraine down 45, Morocco down 13, Ghana down 17, Kenya down 27, Australia down 13, Nigeria down more than 30, Taiwan down 15, and Thailand down 20. We have not seen numbers like these since 2008, when trillions of dollars of stock market wealth has been wiped out globally. So the nothing is happening crowd is simply dead wrong. Stocks are already crashing all over the planet just because the big U.S. stock market crash has not happened quite yet. Does not mean that a major global financial crisis is not happening. But do you know what is crashing here in this country? Junk bonds. At this point, yields on the riskiest junk bonds have risen to levels that we have not seen since the last financial crisis. As I have discussed repeatedly, yields on junk bonds spiked dramatically just before the stock market crash of 2008, and now it's happened again. This is precisely the kind of behavior that would expect to see if a major U.S. stock market crash was imminent. Personally, I watch the junk bond market very, very closely because it is such a key indicator, key leading indicator. And according to Jeffrey Snyder, it appears that something is starting to cause junk bonds to sell off at an alarming pace. There isn't much as far as confirmation, but it increasingly appears as if something just hit the triple hooks CCC in the junk bond bubble. At least as far as one view of it, Bank of America MLS CCC implied yield. There was a huge sell-off that brought the yield to a new cycle high, low in price, above even the 2011 crisis peak. And when you look at the market, it hasn't been a good indicator of when things are good, but it tends to be a real good indicator when things are bad. And one thing that might be somewhat of a reason that junk bonds might be selling off, the yuan or yan or yen, whatever you want to call it. And the IMF has put it into the pool of currencies. Okay, I think I got this clip up now. Maybe. And like in this article that is saying we're seeing the same things that led up to 2008 crisis and crash and recession depression. Well, we're seeing the same stuff add up again. And Peter Schiff talked about it. I got a short clip, but he was talking about it too. And Peter Schiff, the Economic Collapse blog, which this couple of the people on here, I've read a lot of their articles, and they've been pretty accurate on a lot of this stuff. These are all people that aren't talking to each other. They're pointing out historical points that have been indicators, not just once, but twice, 3 times, 4 times throughout history for thousands of years. What does this usually lead to? And a lot of people are getting worried. And one thing you can see that in is the fact that they're not bringing gold price up. Basically, they're not allowing the dollar to correct itself and devalue where it needs to go because they're artificially keeping interest rates low. And people are starting to raise their price on gold again, even though the market's not jumping, or they're holding their prices at a higher level already. And people are still buying it up. Why is this going on? Because more people are aware, and you're seeing that when you're having a lot of different economists or free market people are coming out and saying, it's probably time to, prepare as much as you possibly can. One quick plug, if you go to antityrannynews.com/metal, that'll take you to Moggy Metals, my preferred choice for buying silver and gold. When you go there, you're getting a great price, great selection, definitely for a lot of the drought that is going on with a lot of smaller companies. Even when they have gotten low on their gold and silver, they have still had it in stock. Go check them out. antityrannynews.com/metal, and that'll take you straight to Moggy Metals. And at the same time, you're helping out Anti-Tyranny News in this broadcast. And don't forget to check out UCY's Amazon store. UCY partnered with the Amazon to give you the same great deals through Amazon, the same shipping and customer service. So go check them out. If you go to ucy.tv and scroll down to the bottom, there's a little Amazon button. Click that, and that'll take you right there. And that helps support this network that gives hosts like me a platform to put out information and the truth and try to spread the message of liberty. So definitely check them out. You can also donate at ucy.tv. Click the UCY support tab. I want to get into this clip real quick. We are kind of running out of time. Let's go ahead and cue it up here. Here we go.
Months ago, I was on CNBC. Actually, it wasn't on CNBC Network. I was on their website, cnbc.com, because the producers over at CNBC rarely invite me on their network these days. So instead, I've been relegated to their website. And I was on this program called Futures Now. And I got into an argument with a guy by the name of Scott Nations, who is a regular on CNBC. And we argued about interest rates and whether or not the Fed was about to raise them. And Scott's position was that it was a virtual lock that the Federal Reserve was going to raise interest rates before the end of the year. They'd probably go in September, but certainly by December. My position was that the Fed was not going to raise interest rates at all in 2015. And in fact, they may actually do quantitative easing in 2016.
If price is truth, then, and the price in the futures markets is the collective wisdom of everybody in the world. If you look at Fed funds futures, they're absolutely a lock, according to Fed fund futures, for the Fed to raise rates by the December meeting. 75% likelihood they'll increase by December, and then the likelihood that they'll increase even more continues as you go out further in the Fed funds futures. So why is everybody else wrong and you're right?
Hey, Scott, if you want to know how it's possible for one person to be right and everybody else to be wrong, watch the rest of this video.
The market isn't reacting negatively enough to the housing data, which is only going to get worse. We're not just going to have a hard landing. We're going to have a crash landing. All the inventory that's on the market is going to continue to build, and eventually prices are going to collapse beneath the weight of all that inventory. And then you fast forward a few months or next year, and a lot of homeowners who took out adjustable rate mortgages, negative AM mortgages, interest only, as their rates start to reset and they have to struggle to make those higher mortgage payments, they're going to have very little incentive to do so when their house is worth a lot less than the mortgage they're trying to service. And so that's when you start to see the defaults, the credit contraction, and the price declines really kick into high gear. And then, of course, when you see consumers who have to spend every last drop of money on their mortgage payment, that means they have very little money left to go to Home Depot or to go to, Walmart. So consumer spending falls off the edge of a cliff, and, there goes employment and the economy with it. So it's going to be a self-perpetuating spiral where the housing market and the economy both go down together.
Well, the number of people who have adjustable rate mortgages, according to the Federal Reserve, is actually quite small in proportion to the number of mortgages outstanding. Plus,
no, it's probably about 20. It's probably about 25-30%. And I think more importantly, if you look among the subprime market, and then if you look at the very expensive markets like California, you have a much higher percentage of adjustable rate mortgages. I think if you took a look at the total dollar value of all the mortgage debt, you'd find that adjustable rate mortgages represent a very high percentage.
Except they don't all adjust at once. They adjust over 1 to 7 years. So why is you so worried about what's happening in the short term? By 7 years from now, the economy will look a lot different.
It'll probably be a lot worse. But, as they start to adjust, that's a lot of people with a lot of mortgages. That's a lot of real estate going into foreclosure. People cannot pay these mortgage payments. In fact, a lot of people bought homes with mortgages that they knew they couldn't make. Basically, they figured they would bail themselves out with the appreciation. When the appreciation is not there, they have no way of making these payments.
And joining us now, Peter Schiff, president of Euro-Pacific Capital. There's lots of optimism about the housing market in 2007. Many experts have called the bottom. But, Peter, you say interest rates going higher at 07 means what to home prices?
Well, anyone calling the bottom in the housing market, including Alan Greenspan, it's just wishful thinking.
The economy is stronger than everyone thought it would be. The U.S. economy is not going to go off a cliff. The Fed might be able to slow the housing market down, but I think home prices are going to be a big time next year. So I disagree 100%.
No, in fact, the U.S. economy is not strong. All we're doing is borrowing money from abroad.
Hold on. We're not going to get into that now. All right. What do you think about this link between rates and housing, Gary B?
Is there a gap, Gary?
Is there a gap there?
No, I'll tell you what, Brenda, I don't think there is a link between the rates and housing. We've seen, it depends on what you're talking about. If you're talking about new home sales, existing home sales, I'm talking about median home prices. It's like a freight train. They just keep going up. They went up through the 70s. They went up through the 80s. The only thing that derails the housing market, Brenda, is high unemployment. We don't have that right now.
We don't have
it yet. As far as Peter's talking about, yeah, I've heard this. People aren't saving. And yet, as we discussed on the first segment, household net worth, median net worth is at an all-time high, inflation adjusted. So I don't know where that comes from.
That net worth is all these phony inflated housing prices. Once housing prices start to come back down, the net worth is gone, but all the mortgages are still there.
Tobin?
Peter, this is very good for selling newsletters, and I happen to be in the newsletter business, so we should talk after the show. But this is bunk for two reasons. Number one, as we all said, if you said, geez, American country doesn't save enough money, 80s, 90s, 80s, 70s, you can say it anytime. 1880. We are a country that imports excess capital because other countries are bad users of capital. We're the best users of capital. That's why
we're
we have
not
excess.
using capital. We're destroying it. All we're doing is consuming it.
Peter, just start selling the dried foods.
Okay.
Would you? Come on.
Scott.
Of course there's a link between interest rates and housing. But if rates go up, it could slow housing. It won't kill it. Housing is bumping along the bottom. It is bottoming. That's the key. But interest rates are remarkably low historically and remarkably stable. And my guess is that they will be for the next several years.
You guys sound like the people who are calling for the bottom in the NASDAQ when it was at 4,000.
Hey, Peter.
Yeah.
You want to come back on the show?
Homes be worth more or less in 2007. Time to get more for your money. Ben Stein, Patricia Powell, and Mike Norman are back, and joining us now, Tom Adkins and Peter Schiff. Tom, what do you think?
You're going to see prices go up about 10%. Here's why. Because you're going to come into a regular, normal market, and in regular, normal markets, that's about what kind of appreciation you get. Why? I look at the hit that the housing industry took over the past year. You had oil prices that went up, which made gasoline cost 50% more. You had the Federal Reserve over 2 years raise rates 300%. And still, the housing market barely took it at all. It became a 3% cut in prices.
So your judgment is home prices up 10% in the coming year. Peter, what do you say?
Well, today's home prices are completely unsustainable. They were bid up to these artificial heights by a combination of temporarily low adjustable rate mortgage payments, by a complete, absence of any lending standards, and by speculative buying. And what's going to happen in 2007 is a lot of these artificially low ARM payments are going to be reset upward. You're going to start to see both the government and the lenders reimposing lending standards and tightening up on credit. And you're going to see a lot of the speculative buyers turn into sellers. And these sky-high real estate prices are going to come crashing back down to earth.
Mike?
I first of all, I have no idea what Peter Schiff is talking about. I agree with Tom. I think they're going to be probably up to about 10%. What artificial lending standard are you talking about?
Well,
mortgages have been issued. We have a tiny default rate in the single digits, and that only applies to subprime. In other words, people with the lowest level of credit standard. By the way, the economy still is very strong. We have a 4.5% unemployment rate. GDP is growing. The demographics, in other words, family formations, all the things that factor into housing are playing in here, and that is why we have not had a crash.
What I'm talking about, people buying houses with no documentation of their income, putting nothing down,
what percent?
Let me finish.
Wait, let me finish.
Yeah, with no documentation, putting nothing down, getting negative amortization, interest-only mortgages. They're buying homes they can't afford. They're speculating on appreciation.
Hold on. Interest-only mortgages there's nothing wrong with them because you're paying the interest. You're not losing money on it. But the key thing to look at is net income growth. If net income growth is going up and interest rates are staying the same and we have no inflation right now, there's no reason for it to go up, you're going to see prices go up again.
Yeah, a lot of people who did that made a lot of money on their return on investment. They made a lot of money.
Wait. Last word to Peter.
Most of the profits that people have in real estate are going to vanish, just like the profits in the dot-coms in 1999, 2000. It's a fantasy. People can't sell their house. The inventories are exploding all over the country. Houses are on the market for 6 months a year. There's no bidders. The prices are going to fall through the floor. You guys are deluding yourself.
We heard it. What's average?
65% of the subprime mortgage market, 65% of those bonds, of those mortgages where a guy stated income, no doc, negative AM, risky loans, 65% of those things are repackaged by Wall Street and rated AAA. AAA. The equivalent of sovereign debt.
Okay, I'm going to stop it there. Now, those were replays. The beginning wasn't, but the beginning, this was from beginning of November that this was posted, or the end of September. But we have Janet Yellen talking about raising interest rates. Peter Schiff doesn't think that she will, but they keep threatening to do it. Why do they keep threatening? They're conditioning the market, or attempting to condition the market. They keep threatening, don't do it. Threaten, don't do it. Threaten, don't do it. What happens every time they threaten? Market starts reacting. Well, if they do it enough times, towards the end there, they're going to go, we're going to do it. And they're like, yeah, uh-huh. They kind of got their one eye on them, but they're like, they've been saying this for a while now. And the moment they look their way, they raise them. Well, the longer they do that, the bigger that bubble gets too. Kind of the same idea that happened in the housing bubble. But you kept hearing the clips that he was talking about the housing bubble, and he's being laughed at. Those were multiple different networks. One was Fox. Another one was, I want to say, let me see if I can scroll back here. I think there were two of them on Fox. Two different shows on Fox, and then the other one, I can't remember. It was in our network, though. Bloomberg, I believe. But he was talking about it and being laughed at. They're like, what do you subscribe to? Ha, ha, ha. Who cares that there's houses sitting on the market for almost a year? Not prices dropping on houses that sit for too long. Are you crazy? No one's buying these new houses. And all these people that bought these houses bought them for an inflated price because it's top of the market. And there are people that probably shouldn't have a loan in the first place for that expensive of a home. And wait for the interest rates when the market is corrected. Which then in turn also led to those people being laid off. Now they can't afford the house at all, and if they could, even with the high interest rates. Now we have a whole different type of bubble, but the outcome of it will be the same, but what we're also looking at is the possibility of it being a pretty big punch in the stomach globally, which gives countries like China the chance to play the currency war, which they have done nothing but put themselves in the position to do that. Why everybody's been fighting over here in the Middle East, and Russia plays the strong arm, does it pretty convincingly, which again that's more towards other countries than the U.S. It's saying we're here now, we're going to do the job that the U.S. says that they're trying to do, and we're going to do it real quick. So now what happens? Well, you see Obama at the climate thing talking about cooperation. Yeah, trying to save face and do it without looking like the weak one. But I don't think it's going to happen. He doesn't have that type of... He has that more arrogant rather than commanding. It's kind of one of those guys that stands back, looks up. Take care, stay tuned. Why not?